Hello, everyone. We are going to get started in just a moment. As Amy chatted out to everyone, we encourage you to stick your name and your affiliation in the chat window so that everyone who's participating today can get an idea of who else is joining us. It's great to see participants from across the Northern Forest joining in. Okay, I think we can get rolling at a minute past the hour. My name is Leslie Carrison. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. This is the latest webinar in our Building the New Forest Future series. As I mentioned, I'm Leslie Carrison. I'm the Adirondack Program Director with the Northern Forest Center. And as you no doubt realize, we're here to talk about animating your community through public art. I want to offer a full disclosure that we were planning for me to not be the facilitator today, but this is the benefit of having a strong team. My colleague, Amy Scott, is experiencing some technical difficulties, and I'm going to do my very best to fill her capable shoes. And I'm also supported by a project team, including Maura Adams and Isabella Ronson. You probably all received pop-ups mentioning that we're recording the session. We'll be making a recording available later. And so we encourage you to share that with others that aren't able to be joined with us in person today. So let's get into our topic. We selected this topic because of the important role that art can play in enriching our communities in many varied ways. Art can bring economic benefit, it can inspire individuals of all ages, can bring people together, it can help people feel welcome in our communities, and have many other benefits as well. So we sought out our panelists today from 3 very different organizations approaching public art opportunities in different ways. Each of the groups that they represent prioritizes community benefit that goes well beyond providing opportunities for individual artists, though of course that has importance too. So our panelists today are going to share their origin story, some of the mechanics of how they operate, as well as challenges and opportunities that they face as community partners. So before I introduce our panel, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have some individual introductions from our panelists today, followed by a panel discussion. You can feel free to post questions at any time. We'd ask that you put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat window, just as a helpful trick for us to manage the questions and keep track of them so that we can be sure to field them all. But we would, as we've already mentioned, encourage you to chat out your name and affiliation in the chat. And if you have resources that you'd like to share with everyone, the chat window is a great place to do that. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel today. And I believe in just a second, you'll be seeing a map of where our panelists are coming from. So we have representatives from Saranac Lake, New York, Newport, Vermont, and Bethel, Maine joining us. So from west to east, these little people figures on the map represent Emilie Allen, who's the vice chair of the Saranac Lake Arts and Culture Advisory Board, Rick Ufford-Chase, who is the director of the Newport City Downtown Development, and Kate Webb, who is the program director of Bethel Area Arts and Music. We're so glad that they're each able to make the time to join us today and to be part of our panel. So as I mentioned, we've asked each of our panelists to provide a brief introduction to themselves and how they became involved in their role. And we'll use this to get our conversation going today. We're going to have our speakers speak in the order that I just introduced them, from west to east across the region. So Emilie, followed by Rick, followed by Kate. And so, Emilie, I'm going to hand it off to you to introduce yourself a bit more deeply and to get us started today.
Thanks, Leslie. It's such a pleasure to be here. So Saranac Lake is a little village in the Adirondack Mountains, but we're actually, I think we have the biggest population in the Adirondack Park. Is that right, Leslie? Like about 5,000 people in the village?
Something like that.
Yes. So also I wanted to say details about the art in the slides. I'm going to put that in the chat so you can see what each of these projects are. Except it's not letting me do that for some reason. Okay, so I'll share, I'll read you what each are. So this is a community mural by Nip Rogers and Peter Stewart and or Seward, and these are local artists, and they were selected and invited to submit concepts for this mural, which was sort of an old mosaic that it kind of was done by the community and was kind of falling apart. And so a group of volunteers selected the artists and the concept, and this was crowdfunded by local businesses. And I'll kind of give you info on these throughout. I'm just going to get into the Arts and Culture Advisory Board and what we do. We are a volunteer group that works to support thriving arts, cultural community institutions in an all-inclusive environment that fosters the creative economy, community pride, downtown revitalization, and a myriad of diverse year-round offerings in Saranac Lake. And the general purpose of the board is to help Saranac Lake foster and grow a shared culture through village initiatives and supports of arts organizations and events. So the board was established in 2018 as a part of a broader downtown revitalization project. I've been working on the board since 2018, since the beginning. I'm a writer and a creative, and I work in a variety of mediums, and I've been living in Saranac Lake for over 10 years, and I've just been amazed in general at the incredible fostering and flourishing of community during this time. And I think the arts is sort of a manifestation. This public work is kind of a manifestation of a lot of that growth that I've seen. It's definitely been an interesting ride over the past few years. Personally, I had two babies over the past several years while involved. There was COVID. And so it's definitely, there have been challenges personally and in the community. But this has given me an opportunity to kind of look back at what we've done. And I'm really amazed, and we have a meeting tomorrow. I think we've had a lot of successful projects. So I was really drawn to doing this work because I personally have a deep belief in community building, especially through the power and pleasure of art and art making and bringing folks together. We actually have several arts organizations locally. I've served on boards for some of them, but this felt like really the best opportunity to kind of help serve the broader community and support the different organizations. I've worked on a variety of projects, but right now I'm organizing artist parties locally in the village to kind of bring together groups of people that might not already know each other, and really help emerging artists and kind of cross-pollination of ideas, and help everyone feel accepted and supported. And so that's basically me. If we can go, is there any way to go backwards through the slides? You're sort of, okay. So I just want to, yes, so here's the mural that I discussed. The next slide are these, on the left are downtown banners. This is a celebration of Saranac Lake arts and culture. They hang on street lamps. The illustrations are done by local artists. And then The images are featuring local artists. This is Aquanasini painter Dave Fadden. And on the right, this is a bug crawl concept that was originated in our Slaw Cab group that then other village advisory groups help support, and an artist created these bugs that are all around town, and there's a map to the bugs. It's great for, it's really quite whimsical. Next, we have public art. This is by Matt Horner. And there was some funding for public art that we asked the village to help to provide this work for this community enhancement fund. And so there was a call for artists, 34 artists submitted. This is Matt Horner's work that was selected. And then in the next slide, there are two other artists. There was an additional grant that Saranac Lake was awarded for public art from our Essex County. And so it was divided between these two artists, Stephen Gutteredge and Kirk Sees. And the final image here is Raining Poetry Project. These are poems that were selected by the community, and they were revealed in wet weather. They're painted throughout downtown in several locations. So, thank you.
That is so awesome, Emilie. As a resident of Saranac Lake, I'm grateful for this work, and I have just learned something because I did not know that we have poems that reveal themselves in wet weather. So obviously I need to get out in the rain a little bit. So next we have Rick Ufford-Chase, and I hope, Rick, that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong. To introduce your work as the director of Newport City Downtown Development and your relationship to this topic.
Thank you, Leslie. You did get it right, which is kind of remarkable. Very few people do. So I am the director of Newport City Downtown Development. Newport is a city of just under 5,000 people. It's a county seat located on the southern end of Lake Memphremagog, which stretches 27 miles north, about 6 miles on the US side of the border, and another 20 miles or so on the Canadian side of the border. You're actually looking south in this picture to the south bay of the lake and looking at our downtown area. We are one of 24 designated downtowns in the state of Vermont. This is a designation for communities that are really trying to revive and revitalize their economic town centers. And we follow, like all of those organizations, the Main Street America model, which has as one of its four main pillars, design work. How do we bring public art to our spaces? Go ahead, Isabella, to the next slide, please. So I want to say that I think I was invited because art in Newport is largely aspirational. And so for those of you who are kind of just starting out, trying to figure out how to make something happen, you have good company. At least you have company. We are with you here in Newport. We have no murals at this point. And we have one little sculpture on our main street. Our main street is about 3 long blocks. And this is kind of the healthiest part of our main street. We took this picture just about a month ago. We'll go to the next slide. So we're starting with really what I consider to be low-hanging fruit. The goal here for us is to find the artists and artisans who already exist, and then to do our level best to profile them and give them exposure. So this is one example I thought I'd just pull. The North Country Quilters Guild has been around for many years. They were looking for a way to exhibit their quilts during our fall festival about 3 weeks ago. And there was a local businessman who runs our co-working space, which is right behind where these two women are seated. And he offered free exhibit space, and they hung more than 100 quilts on that day as a way to help people begin to just see what already exists. We'll go to the next slide. And this is a similar kind of local grassroots effort. This is a storefront that's been vacant for 10 years. It was in horrible condition. It was covered with dirt, and there was wildly inappropriate graffiti scratched in the dirt on these windows. And a local artist named Heather McCowan came to us and said, I have art that I would love to hang in these spaces if we can get permission to do so. The owner, who does not live here in Newport, was amenable to that. And so we had a community volunteer effort to clean the front of the building. And we took out several truckloads worth of trash and garbage from inside, cleaned all the windows. And then Heather put up these beautiful pieces that she is quite known for. And she's loved it. She was in my office this morning and was relating that one of these pieces is now sold, and she's been commissioned for several others. So it both brings kind of a lively look to our downtown area in a space that we have not been able to revitalize yet. And it gives local profile to our local artists. We'll go to the next slide. This is a project that I'm so excited about. We were invited to turn in a proposal to the Vermont Arts Council. The proposal just went in last week, but we've done a lot of development work getting ready for the proposal. We started with the sketches like the version you see in the top left of this slide, and that was created by an advanced art student at our local high school, and then a local artist who is the co-chair of our design committee stylized it using Adobe and created what you see in the lower right corner, the blue figure. And we're going to be creating, if all goes well and we get this grant, this winter, we will be creating 10 flat sculptures. And I wish I had a good representation to show you. I didn't have one in my collection to show you, but it will be acrylic with a design etched onto it, and then aluminum that has had this figure stamped out of it in front of the acrylic, and it will be backlit with LED lights. So you'll see the silhouette coming through. So if we get that grant, we will have these produced over the winter, and they will go up in 10 locations pretty quickly in the late spring of next year. We'll go to the next slide. And this is the last slide. And I just mention it because this also is aspirational. This last summer, we resurrected something that used to be around in Newport called the Aquafest, renamed it the Memphremagog Festival after our lake. And next year, the dream is that we will have run a community collaboration crowdfunding campaign to raise, we hope, $15,000 to $20,000, which the Better Places grant program of the state of Vermont is willing to match 2 to 1. So if we are successful in raising $15,000, the state will put in 30, and we'll have a $45,000 fund. And then our goal will be to do a call for artists who are willing to work in our community on a design that they submit, but with community support. And then next year, about the end of July, as part of the Memphremagog Festival, we would bring these artists in to work with our community. And we hope to create 3 to 5 new murals in downtown Newport almost overnight, so that folks in the community will literally see a transformation of the downtown area happen very quickly. So that's just kind of an overview. There are lots of other little projects that we're thinking about. One other that I should mention probably is this evening, tomorrow evening, we're having our first in-person gathering of a cross-border creatives collaborative, trying to reach out to artists and performing artists on both the Quebec side and the Vermont side of the border, and beginning to have them think together about what we can do to make our relatively sparse rural area known as a place where arts thrive. So those are just some examples of the things that we're working on right now, and I'm happy to take further questions.
Thank you so much, Rick, for the introduction. You guys have a full hopper of great ideas. So next we have Kate Webb, the Program Director of Bethel Area Arts and Music, to introduce their work. Take it away, Kate.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Bennett Webb, and I am the Program Director for Bethel Area Arts and Music, or BAM. We are a small 501c3 nonprofit based in the Western Maine Mountains in Bethel, Maine. BAM was established in 2017 after the Mahoosic Arts Council disbanded. A group of dedicated volunteers didn't want to see our area lose its only art organization, so they took over and rebranded as BAM. We focus on youth art education, artist opportunities, and community engagement with the performing arts. My personal story is that I grew up surrounded by art, having professional artists for parents. I received a bachelor's degree in art management and a minor in business at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. I worked at Penland School of Craft in North Carolina in their development department until I moved to Maine in 2017. And then a few years later, I was hired as the part-time coordinator for BAM in October of 2020. And since then, I have moved up to full-time as the program director. In addition to myself, we have a quarter-time employee that helps us with our BAM at the Gem programs. As I said previously, BAM focuses on youth arts education, artist opportunities, and community engagement with the performing arts. Next slide, please. Our youth art program brings creative workshops and performances into the schools and the community. These range from 2-hour-long workshops on Saturday mornings to week-long residencies in the schools. And we try to focus on bringing local artists into the school to expose students to the creativity that is right there at home in their community. We also support artists by providing opportunities to sell their work through seasonal art markets, and we're about to launch a local artist directory and collaboration page on our website to better serve local artists. Next slide, please. We collaborate with several other organizations to complete projects and bring programming to the area. Our strongest collaborator is the Gem Theater. In late 2021, we began a partnership called BAM at the Gem, and this program brings live music, art documentaries, artist talks, book releases, and more to the Bethel area. Every one of these events is pay what you can, starting at $0, and this makes our programming accessible for everyone. And we've really tried to focus on bringing diverse programming that you wouldn't normally see in a small rural community. Sorry, there's a plane flying overhead as I'm outside. I apologize if you can hear that. But yeah, our BAM at the Gem programming it seems like it'd be an individual experience sitting in a dark theater, listening to music or seeing a performance, but it really is, you really feel connected to everyone when you're sitting there in the dark listening to music. It really connects everyone, and it's a great experience. Next slide, please. I think I had a slide out of order there, but we do, our biggest community project to date is the Bethel Mural Project that we completed in 2021. The Bethel Mural Project was born out of the pandemic and for a need to connect with each other during a time when we couldn't really do so. With grant support from the Onion Foundation, the Maine Community Foundation, and the Stifler Family Foundation, as well as the community, BAM commissioned Portland, Maine-based artist Ryan Adams to work with local middle schoolers to come up with words that represent community to them. And they came up with "We go together, we grow together," which in this slide here you can see Ryan's painting style is called the Gem style, which was a total coincidence that we painted the Gem Theater with his Gem style of painting, and you can kind of see the words there. It's hard to see, but this side says "we go together," and then on the next slide it says "we grow together." And so if you want to go to the next slide, during the 2.5 months that the mural took to complete, we had over 130 volunteers help prep, prime, and paint the building, as well as make food, drop off cold drinks during a very, very hot summer, and more. Next slide, please. And here's a small group of the volunteers that helped. The artist is all the way on the left. That is Ryan. And then his crew of 3 that he brought with him are next to him. And then the rest were community members who helped us paint the building. The mural wraps around the entire Gem Theater, over 9,000 square feet. And as far as we know, we think it is the largest community public artwork in Maine. And we are very, very happy about that. So we hope to complete more Bethel mural projects in the future with help from the community. But projects of this size take a lot of work, a lot of funding, and a lot of time to put together. So we hope to do more in the future and bring more color to the Bethel area. So yeah, that's BAM in a nutshell. If you'd like to follow us on social media or check out our website, I will put those links. They're here on my slide, and then I'll put them in the chat as well. But thank you all so much.
Awesome, Kate, for that introduction. I see a comment in the chat about how amazing that mural installation is. So we're going to transition into a panel discussion involving all 3 of our panelists. So Emilie, if you can turn your camera back on. So what we want to do here is just engage in conversation. I have a few questions that we have queued up on our end to share. If you as panelists have questions for one another, feel free. If you're curious about something that you saw or something that you want to hear about, that's the kind of conversation we want to have today. And to all of our attendees, again, we encourage you to drop questions into the Q&A at any time, and we will get to those in a little bit. So our first question is sort of just foundational. And Kate, I think you just kind of outlined this a little bit in your introduction, but we want to talk about just sort of the genesis of each of your groups and what the need was and how it was identified. So Emilie, do you mind going first with that question, to the extent that you know the origin story of the Arts and
Sure,
Culture
and maybe,
Advisory Board?
yeah, and Leslie, maybe you can help fill in the blanks since you're from Saranac Lake. So, Saranac Lake, there was a kind of movement for downtown revitalization. We were very lucky through a lot of effort to get some funding from the state, a significant amount of funding, actually. It was about $10 million to revitalize the downtown area, which, I mean, there were many different projects that were proposed, and some were selected and others weren't. And out of that were these different advisory boards. And the arts and culture has always been a huge part of this community forever. And so the revitalization of the downtown through arts and culture was a priority. And so this advisory board was established. And so word kind of traveled through the community. I think there might have been something in the paper. I happen to live next to the community manager or liaison. I can't remember Jamie's the name of that role, but and so she said, you know, you should write a letter. You can write a letter and apply to be on this advisory board. And so I did, and that was 2018, which it's kind of shocking to realize how long we've been working on this stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And just to fill in a couple pieces that I'm familiar with as a resident in the community, yeah, I think Saranac Lake is somewhat unique in terms of having an arts and culture master plan. Maybe later on in the discussion we can get into a little bit the extent to which you find that to be a helpful guiding document or not. Do you want to jump in on that, Emilie, just a little bit?
Right, I forgot about the arts and culture master plan, which is still, and I'll actually put a link here in the so the arts and culture master plan, I think, to be honest, I can't, it's funny how these things work. Like, I can't exactly remember the details of the plan, but there were parameters for this work. And so when we started, we were really trying to fulfill those parameters, and I think we still are, but to be honest, we don't often even talk about the master plan at this stage, because I think we're so deep into the process. But I'll share the link to our village, our kind of overview of what we are doing, which mentions the master plan, but it's interesting it's not linked there.
Great. And just one last technical question, follow-up question for you, Emilie. My understanding is that the advisory board is a group of volunteers that are serving in an advisory capacity to the village government. Is that correct?
Yes, so that is definitely true. It's interesting also how that's evolved. I think we are advising on, you know, there's village property, and so the public art element is kind of what we're facilitating. But so that's certainly an aspect of it. And then I think kind of what's branched off that are a variety of projects based on the individual volunteers' kind of passions and interests as they relate to, you know, ultimately the master plan and kind of creating this arts community that's downtown based. Does that?
Yeah, great, awesome. Do you want to share anything more about, I mean, you are, if I'm understanding correctly, a municipal employee, is that correct? Sorry, that one was for you, Rick.
Sorry. No, I'm actually not a municipal employee. So in order for the community of Newport to receive the downtown designation from the state, there is a requirement that there be a healthy nonprofit organization that's working on engaging the community in economic development work. So I'm the director of that small nonprofit, part-time director, now surrounded by an increasingly growing number of volunteers.
Excellent. And is there anything else about sort of the formation of your group that you want to share with this audience?
Well, I think I wish our story were more unusual, but I think it's probably fairly indicative of the situation for many communities across this region. In our case, we've had a really rough decade. About 10 years ago, there was a promise by some outside developers that they were going to come in and invest over $100 million in our downtown area. And the community in its own way, that all by itself actually was enough to kind of compress some of the growth and the enthusiasm among volunteers. Everybody's attitude kind of, as far as I can piece together, appeared to be, let's see what they do. There's no point in doing something ourselves until we know what these outside developers are going to do. And then on top of that, 3 years later, we discovered that significant funds had been embezzled and the whole project fell apart after destroying a better part of a full city block and tearing down all the buildings with the promise of a $75 million hotel, which never got built. And so our downtown area has been living with this literal kind of gaping hole in the middle of our community ever since then. And it clearly drives the narrative for many people here. And then on top of that, we had COVID, like everyone did, right? So that series of things just kind of set this community up for feeling like, there's not much we can do to change our own destiny. And what's interesting right now is I think there's a lot of kind of pent up demand or pent up interest and activity and passion that comes out of that period of time. And all of a sudden, it feels like we're unleashing a lot of creativity in our community. I have to say, Emilie and Kate, I have huge art envy. Like 3 years from now, I want to come back and do this, and I want to be able to show off the amazing stuff that y'all are showing off. And I think this community has it in it, but we've got a long way to go to try and build it. And my own interest is hearing from the two of you about kind of the mechanics, the actual mechanics of how a community like ours goes about trying to build out things like a large mural project, for instance.
Kate, I wonder if we can take that as a transition for you sharing anything that you didn't share earlier about BAM's origin story, but also responding to Rick's question.
Sure, yeah. So I joined BAM in 2020. So the time between 2017 and 2020, they were entirely volunteer run. They had, I think, between 25 and 30 volunteers that were trying to work together to have an arts organization. That's a lot of hands all trying to make decisions. And when everybody has, they're all equal, they're all volunteers, and there's a lot of personalities in the room, I think it took a toll. And so I think they eventually, I think in 2019, they applied for a capacity building grant from the Betterment Foundation, and they received a 3-year capacity building grant to hire a part-time coordinator. So they had a part-time coordinator for a few months. They had to leave. It was the middle of the pandemic. Things happen. And then they brought me on. And it was a much smaller group of volunteers. They kind of, at that point, a lot of people kind of stepped back. And so there were about 5 or 6 volunteers left. So they were kind of able to have a more structured vision. I think you want to involve everyone, their volunteers want to help, they want to build something, they want to bring art, but when there's that many hands, I think there were too many ideas going around. So having less people involved, they were able to be more focused. And then being able to hire someone that can help even more with that focus. I think that kind of helped. And then with the mural project, they started the mural project before I came in. And that was born of a volunteer who did a smaller I think it was a 10-foot by 15-foot mural on the side of the Gem Theater. And then they had a large 20-foot long Black Lives Matter mural in front of the Gem as well. And that was just like 2 community members who did that by themselves. And that kind of sparked the idea of, well, why don't we do something bigger? And so they applied for grants, they received the funding. And and then it kind of snowballed from there, that they were able to connect with the schools, connect with the artist, try to involve as much of the community as you can, and which was definitely a challenge during the pandemic. All of the meetings between the artist and the students were on Zoom. We only met outside when we did have meetings. As we all know, the pandemic came with many, many challenges. So yeah, does that kind of answer your question, Rick? I hope that kind of covers kind of how we got there. And yeah, I think it just, if you have impassioned people that want to really make things happen, I think that's really how it goes. And I can't do it by myself. I've got this great group of volunteers that help. It's just the way people work together. I think it's sometimes the right group of people come together and are able to produce something as big and great as this mural that we did. And personalities, as surprising as it may seem, sometimes influence success.
I identified with a lot of things that you just said. So in Saranac, like, this is great. Thank you for the link to the master, the arts and culture master plan, which sort of served as a starting point for our group. And it's interesting, if anyone cares to look at it, I think it's pretty interesting to look at, especially looking back in time, and what has kind of been achieved and what hasn't. I definitely, if you're looking at this, there's the kind of different recommendations that came from this master plan, and the committee that was on this master plan is not the same group of people. There is some overlap, but not the same group of people who are volunteering on the board. But some of these kind of responsibilities then, or these goals, recommendations, guided the committee. And so when we began, we looked at this, and then, different personalities, different preferences, people said, okay, I have an idea about, how to address this recommendation. One recommendation that connects to, economic development was visually, brand the village as an arts and cultural destination through public art. And I think that has been one of the main focuses of the group. Public art kind of really defined very widely. And so again, I think if you have, like you said, if you have a group of people with like big ideas and different personalities, kind of allowing them the freedom to come up with these different ideas and then to execute. And so for a bigger project like our mural, which my image didn't really show the full scale of it, but nothing like the Bethel the Bethel Gem Theater. It was done through COVID, and it was a lot of those things of coming together over Zoom or coming together outside, that we knew we had that space. That was one of the things that we looked at, what spaces are in the village that we can help support bringing art to. And so that was this falling down mosaic. And again, it was sensitive because it was a mosaic that was community built many years ago. And so there was some sensitivity, and we were aware of, like, removing this work of art is crumbling. I mean, the whole thing was crumbling. And so that was clearly a big priority. And so essentially a couple of us, myself and Kirk, who's the chair of the committee now, we decided to spearhead that project. And so and then we kind of worked with the group to figure out exactly how to do it. And so it involved, finding the right crowdsourcing venue, knowing that we had very little money from the village. I think maybe we had like $10,000 that they had allotted to us, and that really all went toward the structure of the wall. So there was some kind of getting the different craftspeople to come together, and carpenters to kind of make sure, masons to make sure we had a good surface. So that was sort of step one was just getting it ready for art. And then we put out kind of a call to local artists, but we did approach, a certain group of artists that we knew were capable of doing this kind of work and that were local. And then putting together a committee of people who were not the volunteers on the board to really essentially a blind jury to look at the work and the proposals. And then a kind of that committee also going forward, working with the artist, they came up with different concepts. We gave feedback on what they were proposing and feedback on whether it was representing the sort of spirit of Saranac Lake. And we really left that quite open when we were looking at proposals in general, what it had to have the spirit of Saranac Lake, but that was kind of it. And maybe that, of course, for us includes diversity and inclusion. And so it felt like a very long, drawn out process. It was supposed to be done one summer, but then, we had trouble getting a mason. And so it kind of felt like it went on for a while, but it really, in retrospect, did not. We were kind of just moving through the steps. And so then it was sort of painted, I guess about a year. It's been finished for a little bit over a year. And it was crowdfunded, so the community and local businesses gave money, and that's how we paid the artists. And it's at a very busy intersection, and it's especially in a snowy mountain town, it's been really just such a vibrant piece. And so that's basically that's been kind of the most involved process. The same for kind of the public art, the other public arts, the sculpture in my slides. But then individual passion projects, painting of benches, there are these kind of subcommittees of people. And we have it's probably like 7 to 9 people on the board, I think. And so people are kind of going with what they're most passionate about. And it all does relate back to the arts and culture, the master plan. I think it is good to look back, but it's very interesting to see what's aspirational. And this plan isn't just the plan for our advisory board. It's really there are other organizations or the Chamber of Commerce that are supposed to be responsible for other things. This plan also said, there's going to be all this money. And of course, there's been very little money. And I don't know, how much these other groups, the Chamber of Commerce, or I've just, Artworks, these individual groups have actually committed to these things. I think it's mainly been the advisory board in general.
Thank you, Emilie. Going off of that point about sort of the process that you guys have gone through in terms of issuing a call for artists and providing some parameters, I wonder, Kate, or maybe Rick, you have some guidance here or have thought ahead about what you would like to accomplish in the future. How have you sort of structured a process to help identify what qualifies as the kind of art that you want to feature in your community?
Rick, do you want to go ahead?
No, I'm all ears. I want to hear what y'all have done because we're just beginning to ask those questions right now.
I don't know if this will fully answer the question, but when the mural process was not 100% accepted by everyone. The mural design, we had some pushback when we released the designs. Facebook got very upset. A lot of people, we had a lot of pushback. It's the first mural in the town. There was not any really community outreach to be like, oh, what kind of design do you want? Do you like this design? And I think we realized that in the future we need to do something more like that. you know, you have two sides to every coin. Half the people were like, this is amazing. You're bringing something interesting. Thank you. Look at this. And then the other half is, this isn't New York City. Why can't you paint some fish? You know, like there, you know, there you have, what is art really? I mean, that's the point. Like, what is art? And we all have different definitions. We all have different things that we like. I think with our next big project like that, I think we would do a little more community involvement and get some more feedback. Maybe not do something so abstract and shocking, but yeah, I think definitely involving the community in the design process. And even if you still get, I mean, I haven't heard someone say something negative about the mural in over a year. Like everybody, they're like, oh yeah, that colorful building. You get used to it. And I think as long as you show that you are listening to the community and that you want to hear what they have to say and that you're willing to listen, I think that's the biggest part.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. That I just wanted to say that it's similar here. I think that when you're putting public art in places, there's always going to be conversation, sometimes heated. And we didn't crowdfund, or we didn't sort of get everyone in the world in the village to say this is the design we want. But when we crowdfunded, we said, here's what it's going to look like. Basically, if you want to support, please, you know, donate $20 or whatever you can. And I think sometimes I love hearing, like, you know, now people, it's just like the colorful building, because I think that people do get used to these things, and it's being comfortable, feeling a little bit uncomfortable, pushing the community in these ways.
Great. Rick, to the extent that you maybe have thought ahead about what this journey may look like for you, do you have any thoughts to share?
I think I just want to say that one thing that's pretty clear to me is that, you know, in all kinds of ways, when we talk about community revitalization, in particularly a small rural community like this one, we need to bring a huge amount of sensitivity to the table. You know, folks here are pretty clear about what they don't want to become, right? They're not looking to become Aspen, Colorado in the town of Newport, in spite of the fact that we're in a remarkably beautiful location. And honestly, you know, there's some genuine possibility that we could get overrun by creating such a beautiful spot here and such a welcoming spot that all of a sudden this community doesn't kind of represent its own values anymore. So identifying what the values are here, you know, I haven't lived here for most of my life, but my family goes back 6 generations here. And I can name the values in my family that this community is committed to. I came up with it a few weeks ago and said, I think it's really the 3 G's: grit, generosity, and genuineness. And anything we do needs to reflect those values in order for this community to grow in a way that feels like it's true to itself. So I think that matters a lot. I really appreciate, Kate, what you said about trying to step out and meet the community and find out what it is they really want. We did a survey this summer that we're going to have to do again because it didn't have as much participation as I would have liked to have seen. Any of us would have liked to have seen. But the responses we got were very valuable. And, you know, part of the reason we're going way out of our way to build our first projects around local high school students, for instance, is because we want them and their families to see themselves reflected. And we want them to drive down the street and say, I did that. That was me. And if we can build art in that way, I think we've got all kinds of possibility here.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Rick. And that's why we tried to that's why we involved the middle schoolers. We wanted the kids to feel like they had their mark on it. They have ownership over it, and they do. And all of the people that helped us paint, like I'll walk past the building and I'll see some group of people and they'll be like, see that little triangle? I painted that triangle. And it's like they have ownership in it. They feel seen within their community. They know that they're accepted there because they're a part of it. It's really special.
That's so great. I mean, this ties right to a question that we have in our list of questions that we were hoping to pose, and to a certain extent, you guys have addressed it already. But the question reads as: can you talk about art as an engagement tool? how is it a driver for community building and community connection? So obviously that's a fabulous example that you've just provided. I wonder if you have other broader thoughts, any of you, on that topic.
I
Or if
guess,
we've covered it, I can pose a different question.
well, I'll just say, Saranac Lake is unique, and then I feel like art's identity is really, it is a value. It kind of has a history, decidedly different as our slogan of our village. And so as far as engagement and community, I mean, I think the desire to engage is present, but in some ways we have all these different arts organizations, and bringing everyone together for different events, which is something that I'm working on now. There's a way, like, people can feel very isolated in rural places, and I think artists a lot of times are in they're kind of functioning in their own world. And so I think there's twofold. I mean, I think there's engagement within the artist community that is really important. And then I think art is, from what I've seen with the different projects that we've brought together, and the different kind of the diversity here, which is also, 50% probably conservative and 50% something else. Art kind of creates a space for people to, even if they don't agree, to kind of come together and have conversations, important conversations. And this village is pretty, there's a whimsical nature to our community, I would say. There's a playfulness. And so art as a kind of, and a lot of the work that's popping up around town, some of which is just on private people's property, people deciding, I want to put a mural, or I want to do this. Art kind of, in Saranac Lake anyway, it can deal with maybe deeper issues, but also be kind of playful. I mean, even the mural that was painted, there's a diversity of people in that mural. There's definitely some, there's rainbows. It's very clearly a certain perspective, I would say, but I feel like very few people would kind of not feel like it's a place for coming, like it kind of represents the coming together of everyone. And so despite the diversity of viewpoints, I think that art is a place to, or art provides a way to engage with everyone in the community, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Great. Kate or Rick, do you want to address that topic at all?
I agree with Emilie. I think she put it into great words.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Wonderful. I want to ask about collaboration a little bit. I wonder in what ways your groups have been catalysts for other projects or activities in your community, and whether there have been collaborations with community groups or businesses that have emerged. And again, whichever of you would like to chime in.
So maybe I could start on that one, because I saw Tenley's question in the Q&A also about Newport's kind of downtown organization. So I'll just use that as a transition conversation. We in Newport, our downtown organization is clearly a vehicle through which these creative things can happen, but we are not the only game in town. And we're not even in many ways the most important organizing game in town. So it's pretty clear to me that our role is to find latent energy wherever it exists and work to help it thrive. And if that means that we can add some organizational structure to it, I'll give you an example. Last summer, over the last year, a group of folks came together who decided they wanted to bring the first ever Pride parade to Newport. And they had no organizational structure behind them. And so we just used our organization and said, what do you need? How can we help you get it? And in the end, we had this remarkable event with 180 participants in the parade itself. It was just a huge success. And so our organization really ought to be mostly about that kind of collaboration. If they have the strength to do it on their own and they just need a boost or a partner, we're all about it. If they need someone to provide a little bit of structure underneath it in order for their own energy to flourish, that's great. And if they need it, honestly, to just be something where they can add their energy to something that someone else is kind of taking the lead on, then, it's appropriate, I think, for an organization like ours to step in and try and provide that vehicle as well.
Yeah, I would kind of say the same for us, maybe more so collaborative. We've done, like I said, our biggest collaboration is with the Gem Theater, and they are a for-profit business, but then we also collaborate with other nonprofits. One of our biggest projects is a collaboration between the Age Friendly Community Initiative. They received a grant from AARP to be a part of this Our Towns project, which is like kind of making space for all ages. And this project was specifically focused on building picnic tables and benches and then designing and painting them, which there was a group of retired older guys called the Congo Craftsmen, and they built all of the items, about 25 benches and tables, that then BAM, we organized the painting and designing and painting of all of these items. And we brought them to various community events like our Harvest Fest, the Monarch Festival, and just we did like outlines of designs and then had paint for everybody to like, hey, paint in this pumpkin, paint in this little square. What does Bethel mean to you? And another one of those, having ownership, and like every time they ask, oh, where's this table going to go? Oh, it's at the chamber. We can go visit it. You can see your pumpkin that you painted. And yeah, collaborations are so important. I mean, like I said earlier, you can't do everything on your own. And being in a small community with so many, like we're the only art-based nonprofit, but there are so many nonprofits in our small rural town that you have to collaborate, or you're all going to be doing so many different things and they won't be as successful. But if you work together, you can really build some programs out that really benefit everyone. And everything is interconnected, I mean, the environment, the arts, like they complement each other so well. So yeah, collaboration's important.
Yeah, I feel like it's been essential. We do, so we have multiple nonprofits, arts nonprofits, in Saranac Lake, like I mentioned. We've done different collaborations. We're starting to collaborate with the schools as well. So it's actually really exciting to see the projects that you've done with the schools. But we have found, because there are so many different nonprofits, that we have to be careful, because you want to support everyone, and you really, so we're kind of in the process of establishing ourselves as a little bit like of neutral ground, because you don't want to be too aligned with one organization or one collaborator. And so that is something that we're always kind of considering, and how to also establish ourselves as our own identity, letting people know a lot. I mean, honestly, one of the hardest things I think is like the PR of getting out the word about these projects, and making sure everyone, all the arts organizations, feel that they're part of the village and that we're celebrating everyone.
Great. I'm gonna ask the next question that plays off of a chat that Melissa shared, a economic impact of the creative economy report. So I want to call everyone's attention to that resource. And as I believe Amy mentioned earlier, we will be collating resources that are shared during this and including them in a follow-up email. So no need to click on it and try to multitask in real time. You'll get this stuff in an email. But we've talked a lot about the benefits of art in terms of community engagement and sort of a lens on the community and bringing out different community attributes and helping you helping community members to sort of see the community through a different lens. How about the economic piece? Like, how does arts show up as an economic driver in your work? And again, whoever's brave enough to just jump in.
I know for us, we really, over the last few years, we've really wanted to make Bethel a regional arts destination. And that totally plays into the economy. You know, we have two large ski slopes around us, and that is a huge driver for the economy in Bethel. But we want to also set us apart from just being a ski town. We're so much more than a ski town. We, you know, we have the arts, we have nature, we have so much. And so that has kind of been a goal of ours that we're working towards, is if we can establish enough programs and get I don't know, get our names out there more, you know, and have people come to us. That's kind of a big driver for us. And I think that would absolutely support the economy, support the hotels in town, support the restaurants, like just bringing more people in, and us being a destination for that. I think, I mean, so many towns are art destinations that I think it's totally plausible.
I would say that we just on the road is Lake Placid, New York, which is pretty famous for tourism, and we also do get our share of tourists. And the village here, maybe not to compare to Lake Placid, but we have plenty of lovely restaurants. That a new hotel has opened, and so art in the downtown core really does differentiate us from specifically Lake Placid, but also within the Adirondacks, there isn't a ton of kind of art. There aren't many places that you go for the arts, and so to be known for that within the state park, and to get people here. But again, it's interesting, you know, Rick mentioned not wanting to, that making it too much of a destination, or like bringing, you know, there's that balance of building, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. The balance of bringing tourism and tourists with supporting and nurturing this local community is something, you know, that certainly is on top of mind, I think, as we do this work.
I just want to double back for a second to this Cross-Border Creatives Collective. This is the initiative largely of a woman here in the Northeast Kingdom, the northern part of the Northeast Kingdom, who serves on the board of Catamount Arts program in St. Johnsbury, which has been wildly successful at lifting up the arts all over that area of the state. And her interest, my interest, our shared interest is in trying to figure out how we can do the same thing in this much less populated area of the state. And we're beginning to recognize that we really can't do it alone, that, you know, we've got this odd location that means that we act like we're a 180-degree community, when in fact we ought to be acting like we're a 360-degree community. But the border somehow stunts that and keeps us from doing that. You know, and there's no accident in that. I've been a border resident in one way or another for 25 or 30 years. I lived on the US-Mexico border for 20 years. And there's a significant amount of intention in making us afraid to cross borders in this country right now. And I'd say that that's been heightened over the last 25 years. And so part of what we're trying to do is just help people understand that there's nothing to be afraid of and everything to gain in terms of enriching one another's lives when we step across the border and start discovering that there are artisans and artists on both sides of the border who have a huge desire to collaborate with each other and connect with each other. We'd had a wonderful first example of that collaboration this summer. We worked with colleagues from Quebec to create a new big fold-out map called the Sights and Tastes of Memphremagog. that intentionally draws people's attention to the entire lake, not just one side or the other. And we're pretty clear that as we're creating a community here, it is not a 180 community in terms of the arts. It's going to have to reflect the culture of both sides of the border, because that culture has really, both of our cultures have been impacted by one another in dramatic ways over the last 200 years.
Fabulous. Thank you. I want to thank again both Melissa and Erin for throwing some resources in the chat, and I encourage everybody else to continue to do the same if you have other resources that you'd like to share. One resource that I've been hearing about in the Adirondacks, and I'll find a link to it in a moment, is a regional mural map that North Country Public Radio has been assembling to try to draw attention to a widely dispersed set of murals. So I'll try to include that in the chat in a moment. So let's take a moment to talk about funding. You guys have referred to crowdfunding. You mentioned capacity building grants through a private foundation. You've talked about certainly applying for grants. Does anyone, are there other funding sources that you have found to be helpful, or do you have any other insights to share on sort of funding models that have worked for your organizations in getting this important work done?
Well, I would say we are mostly grant funded, and then we do various fundraisers throughout the year. With our BAM at the Gym, we do our pay what you can model. All of our ticket revenue comes back to BAM to do further programming. And then the Gym was also kind enough to add 2 more tiers of membership, that half of the membership goes towards our BAM at the Gym program. So that collaborative relationship we formed with them, they have been able to support us in that way. Whereas it's the memberships aren't taking away from their funding, but also assisting us. And with that same program, they continued to give their advertising. They do on-screen advertising before all of the movies they play, because they're a working movie theater, and they handed over their advertising program to us so that all of that money makes up our BAM at the Gem fund. And they have somewhat lost out on this, so we're trying to make this more of a virtuous circle. They're making money, we're providing programs that bring more people in, so they buy more concessions, so the Gem makes money, BAM makes money. That's kind of where that idea came from, was can everyone benefit in this model? So you just have to be creative. And grant funding is not always guaranteed. It's wonderful and it's great. We love grant funding, but it's not always guaranteed. So you have to be creative with your other ways of finding funds to do this important work.
Yeah, I would say we've done a lot with not a lot of money. And I think there is some sensitivity. So our funding, I guess there has been some funding for the village. So like the beautification of village spaces. There's some money in the budget. So we have had that, as well as kind of some crowdfunding, as I mentioned, and some grant work, but not a ton. And honestly, I think it's one of the challenges is in terms of the village and in terms of some people being divided about whether public funds should be spent on art. And there's a lot of people that don't think it should be, and that's totally fine. And so I think there's sensitivity around it, and we are always looking and thinking about different creative ways to fund things. But for the arts parties, for example, I mean, we have had some donated funds to provide food for those parties, but like that, but really, there's no budget for that. So it's looking, I think it's trying to find local businesses that might be interested in a particular project, getting funding that way. But obviously, as always, you know, with arts, it's just a real challenge.
I'll just add quickly that I think both Kate and Emilie are sharing experience that I've had, not just here, but over a lifetime of working in kind of movement-based space around social justice issues and arts and culture. And, you know, one of the things I've learned over the years is that grant funding is amazing when it's there and available. But if you become dependent on it, it actually stultifies your community when it's not available. And so, you know, individual donors who are committed because you've asked them to be involved in hands-on concrete ways, and they can see the difference they're making in their community, is where the long-term support for this kind of work has always resided and is likely to continue to reside. So nobody's happier than I am when there's money out there and available through grants, but grant cycles are fickle. And even if you get the money this year, there's no guarantee you're going to get it next year. So if you want non-fickle support, you've got to get people involved in concrete, hands-on ways.
That very well said.
You know, Emilie raised this question of, should public funds be directed to support arts programming? So I wonder how, this is a more philosophical question, I wonder how each of you would make that case to, you know, public officials in terms of spending public dollars. How would you articulate the value that you each have seen or hope to see in terms of the value that art can bring to your community?
That's interesting. I mean, I think we're in the process actually of trying to figure out how to articulate that to the community, and the messaging to the community, like the PR stuff that I mentioned. I think there is an argument to be made, but I don't think it. But I think the argument is a lot more around dialogue and how art encourages dialogue and differences of opinion, and you know, letting people, giving people the space to communicate with other people who may have shared views but may not. And it's actually without the art, like what are people gonna talk about, or like you know, how are people going to I think it creates dialogue. I think it creates engagement among the community, and if it's not there, then that conversation can't be necessarily had, and especially at a time when there's so many different things to, you know, disagree about. I think art is actually more of a safe space to enter into some of these kinds of conversations.
Art makes meaning and it articulates existing meaning. And, you know, I think for me, the conversation is not so much about whether it's appropriate to spend money in this area, but to reflect that our communities are capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. It's not the only thing, but it's an important thing. And, you know, nobody knows that more in my experience than artists themselves, who often are economically strapped and trying to figure out how to make ends meet and make a life for themselves. And so our organizations need to be cross-sector and collaborative. And the more we do that, the less we're going to argue about whether or not art is something that's important, and the more clear it becomes that it's one piece of what it takes to make a vibrant community.
Well said.
Wonderful. I'm struggling a little bit because you guys are hitting on so many themes that we had hoped to touch on. So I'm struggling a little bit to figure out which ones we have not yet hit on. In what ways have you catalyzed other projects or activities outside of your own direct work? If anyone has an example to point to in that realm.
I would just say that I think a lot of public art has kind of popped up in the village of Saranac Lake that has nothing to do with our work. I mean, it isn't related, it's just sort of appears. And so I think for us, it's kind of there's this momentum that has emerged, which is exciting. And some of that momentum, I'll say, you know, I know there was a group of artists who really identified as outsider artists, and they were like, hey, wait a second, you know, the village is doing this work, like we want to do our own thing. And so, you know, little pieces kind of start appearing everywhere, which is really, really awesome.
I guess I want to pivot to asking about volunteers a little bit. This is a theme that several of you have touched on. It seems to me, Rick, I loved your language about finding latent energy wherever it exists and trying to provide it some structure. It seems to me that when you kind of combine artists, and this is, I think, what you're driving at too, Emilie, you combine sort of the energy of artists and the notion of volunteerism. And, you know, you can either get like a fabulous outcome, or you could probably get like a real mess of a process. So I wonder how you guys have worked with and harnessing the energy, the positive energy that volunteers and artists can bring to the table, and directed that in a positive way.
I know I've personally struggled engaging with some volunteers when it's not a big project. You know, people get very excited about big projects, something that's interesting, they really want to be a part of it. But, you know, if it's a smaller thing like painting a table blue, sometimes it's hard to get engagement on things that are like not as exciting, not as whatever. So that's something that I'm personally working on, is engaging artists, engaging volunteers in things that might not be so out there. So if either of you have some advice on that, I'm all ears.
To be honest, we haven't utilized, I mean, we're a volunteer committee. And then you know, these different projects come up, and we kind of break off into 2s and 3s and do what we can as groups. And maybe, you know, pull in volunteers to be on a jury panel or something, but we haven't done like a big call for community volunteers. And I think that will happen, but in some ways, I think keeping it nimble, still kind of inclusive, but nimble in the process has helped. Has helped us like actually accomplish some things, because it can get a bit unwieldy. But you still want people to come out and participate. So we're, I think, in some ways still grappling with how to do that.
I love that struggle, Emilie, right? Because, you know, one of the things I learned many, many years ago is that it's a mistake to simply put out a call and say, everybody come, because not everybody is a good fit for every project. And then you've invited people in as if there's no litmus test for whether or not they're the appropriate people to be engaged. So I'm pretty hesitant to put out those kinds of open calls, but I'll meet with anybody individually. And my days are full of just one-on-ones and trying to find out what makes people passionate, and who have I talked with who shares that passion, and how can I connect them together to create a little bit of synergy, and then just get behind the synergy and let it begin to roll, right? So I do a lot of cultivating before I invite people in as volunteers. But I can't think of anybody I would say no to. It's just a question of making sure that where we're connecting them is the most appropriate place, and making sure they feel honored and appreciated for what they bring to the table in the process. Because the last thing you want to do is actually squash somebody's energy, right? When they say, I really want to do this, but they're really not a good fit, and everybody in the room except them seems to know it, right? That's just a part of working with volunteers. And if somebody had taken the time to really focus on that person and find out where their energy could be well deployed, it would have avoided a pretty messy situation in the first place.
I think that's super brilliant. And I just wanted to say that like creating with these kind of over the past year, every season, these parties, these gatherings, it's not about volunteering. It's more like come and be part of this community and let's start having some dialogues. And so, you know, if someone is really interested in a particular idea, that's kind of a cool forum to casually talk about it. So I think there are ways to include everyone that aren't like, okay, you know, here's a job and I'm not sure if you're the person for it, but you're a warm body. But anyway, I love that idea of kind of cultivation.
And I'm going to steal your community gatherings idea, because I actually think it's all about connection and helping people feel connected to each other. Love it.
So I wonder if any of you have examples of any unexpected effects of growing the arts in your community. Has your work led to any results that you were not anticipating?
I mean, I was surprised that there was a question in the local paper. Did you see that, Leslie, online? That was like, do you support more? Do you think Saranac Lake needs more public art? And for a while there, it was like overwhelmingly no, because you could see the results after you voted, and that was a little bit scary for us. But then we kind of got the word out, and it really ended up. I mean, there were more yeses than nos, but and that was kind of, you know, a simple thing, but also I think something that to reflect on as a board too.
Kate, do you have any examples of unexpected effects that you would point to? Positive, negative, any of it?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I mean, maybe just more engagement and excitement for the programs we're doing. I think we started out pretty low. We only had like 20 people come to our first few concerts, and then we had our first sold out show this year, or two sold out shows this year, with over 160 people at them. So I think it's and my art, I do this winter art market, and last year I could barely get enough people to fill the room, and now I have a wait list of 15 to 20 artists. So it's when you're mostly working by yourself and you see these changes and your numbers are growing, that's always a nice surprise. I'd say that's the biggest.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a wonderful metric of success. So as we near the end of our time here, I want to just sort of give you each a chance to kind of weigh in with final thoughts, and especially I think, you know, Rick, as you positioned yourself earlier as being sort of earlier in this journey in your community, I wonder, Kate and Emilie, if you have any sort of guidance or advice or thoughts that you haven't shared so far that you'd like to offer to Rick or another community that's sort of earlier in its journey, in terms of developing the thought of the role that arts might have in public programming. And conversely, Rick, if you have any observations or questions that you have that you'd like to offer up. So I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kate.
I was going to say, don't give up. I mean, there's always going to be someone who supports what you're doing. And even if you don't see it every single day, there are people that support you out there. I would also say start small. When I joined BAM, they didn't really have like an exact structure. It was kind of like, oh, we're just doing art things. And when we have funding, we'll do the art things. But then me coming in and trying to like wrap my brain around it, I had to structure it in a way that made sense and that's easily told to others. So you just have to start small. Start with small projects. Those will be consistent. They'll start to run themselves. Then you can do more projects that then run themselves, and so on and so on. And then you just have a whole plethora of programs, and a community of support, that'd be my advice.
I think that's excellent advice. I mean, I really think having a person in the role that you're both in, and Rick, I just think you have such great ideas and such insight and sensitivity to what this process is, and such a good read it feels like on your community. Your role is pivotal. I don't know if Jamie is still on here, but JB Konkowski was our community, Saranac Lake, the kind of community liaison for the village. And she having that leadership role, and being in that position and kind of having a sensitivity and openness to allowing whatever group of people you're working with to trust those people. And it sounds like if you're cultivating these individuals in the way that you are, then you can have that trust. But your roles are pivotal, because I think otherwise it's you kind of need someone to lead the band. And I think messaging, figuring out a way to message what you're doing to the broader community is really important. And that's a challenging one. I think for us, we have all these different awesome projects happening, and you don't get stung. You have all these awesome different projects happening, and it's really easy, especially with volunteers and when you yourself have so much on your plate. The messaging and the PR piece can really get lost. It's just so kind of having an idea about how to communicate what's happening. That's, I think, a good thing to kind of think about from the beginning.
Rick, I'm going to offer you the last word if you have any closing questions or thoughts or reflections.
Well, I appreciate the last word. The reason I said yes when Leslie and Amy and Isabella asked if I'd participate in this, even knowing how little experience we have to put on the table right now, is because my number one belief is that we should steal from others shamelessly, ask their permission, give them credit, but steal ideas like crazy and collaborate with one another. And this has been fabulous for me. I'm really grateful, Emilie and Kate, to the two of you for the examples you've shared, and for all the folks who have put stuff into the chat with resources that I probably should have known about in my busy life. I didn't. So I'm grateful for that. And you filled up my reading for the next couple of days. And I look forward to people coming here and saying, wow, what a cool thing this is. How'd you make that happen? Just give me a few years and our community will make that stuff happen too.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, that is a great transition to some of my closing thoughts, which is really to start from that place of gratitude to the three of you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and your experiences and your thoughts. I feel grateful personally that I had a chance to sort of be part of this virtual chat and appreciate your time. And we also want to thank all of our attendees for joining today, as well as to thank the USDA Rural Development and other funders that have supported our series through this webinar series. We will in a moment be chatting out a link to an evaluation that we would encourage you to complete to give us some feedback on this webinar and other topics that you might like to receive or have us talk about in future webinar series. And lastly, you can see up on the screen at the moment an invitation to join us on November 15th for a future webinar on winter trail management, responding to user expectations in a changing climate. And there is a link that is both on the screen and I think will be coming out in the chat in a minute too, if Isabella or Amy has a chance to pop that in. That conversation will address adaptations to climate change, safety, multiple use considerations, and more. So we would hope that many of you will join us for that conversation on November 15th. Thank you all so much for your participation. We really appreciate this very rich conversation, and hope everyone has a great day.